So if anyone's ever, and you'll hear this sometimes, if anyone's ever like, oh, those people who show up at community meals, they're just sort of freeloaders, you know, they could probably eat, I bet they got a full fridge at home. Just remind them that there's more to it than just feeding yourself. It's also got a strong social component, and that people who otherwise would be suffering from isolation get a chance to be together around food. And that's the great thing about food, is that it brings people together. So I think it's about 4 years ago, the United Way and the Perth District Health Unit invited everyone who's working on food security in our community to come together and to talk, to collaborate, to create a coalition called the Perth County Food Security Coalition. And the idea was, look, we're all doing this, we're all working on the same issues. Whether you're running a food bank, whether you're a volunteer at a community meal, whether you're with the United Way or with the health unit. You know, we're all out here to fight hunger and to fight poverty. And what can we do together that would be more than what we could all do individually? We're all doing great work individually, but surely together we can do even more. And so their mandate was to enhance access to nutritious food, so healthy food, among residents of Perth County, particularly those most vulnerable to hunger. So people who are low income or people who are lacking in skills, as you mentioned. So the plan that they came up with was to create a food distribution center. So this is basically a warehouse where all of them would be able to access food that would be taken in and stored. So I mentioned that the non-perishable aspect of food banks is due to an issue of capacity a lot of the time. So, you know, food banks just can't take, you know, if a company that was, say, packaging chicken thighs and breasts was found that for one reason or another they couldn't sell that product. There's little reasons why these sort of places can't have products that can't be sold. Sometimes the store that they've been selling it to says, we're not going to take that product anymore. We've discontinued that. And they find that they got like skids and skids and skids of food that they had ready to sell to those people, and suddenly there's no more client, there's no more destination. So they're going to chuck it. Unfortunately, what happens is because there's no place to take that kind of food in, they'll have to throw it out. And so the idea here is that a food distribution center could tell all those processing plants, factories, farmers, what would be another example, greenhouses, that if there's ever a situation where you're about to throw out food that's perfectly edible, you give us a call and we'll come pick it up. We'll rescue it, we'll bring it, we'll connect it to people who can really benefit from it. So that's the idea. Also to canvass for donations, to tell people in the food producing community, agriculture, retail, like stores and stuff like that, if you want to donate food, we'll take it. We'll take it in quantity. So House of Blessing is amazing, but they could never take 10 skids of tomato sauce. So the food distribution center concept is to provide a place where someone's working all the time, taking in those big quantities of food, having a big freezer space, having a big fridge space, and opening the doors to not-for-profits who are working on food to access that food. So increasing capacity and always focusing on nutritious food. So that's where they were at. This was happening in Perth County just a little over a year ago. And they were well on their way to making that happen. And that's when a group came to town called the Stop Community Food Center. And now that you've heard about the Stop, you know how sometimes you hear something for the first time and then you're like, you hear about it 10 more times that week because you never really had it on your radar? Now that the Stop's on your radar, keep an eye out because you'll actually, if you're listening to CBC or anything like that, you'll actually see, wow, there's that Stop again. They're really doing a lot. They're really getting a lot of recognition. They're very, very highly respected for what they've been doing. They are in Toronto. It started off about 30 years ago as a food bank. Food banks actually only started about 30 years ago. I don't know if you guys are going to look into the history of food banking, but they haven't been with us forever. They've been with us since like the 80s when there was a recession and there was some serious emergencies around people having access to food. So they said, okay, we'll do this temporary thing. We'll just set up a temporary food bank and people can access the food. And then when we get past the recession, when the government's provided these people with the social assistance that can allow them to purchase food, then then the food banks won't have to be around anymore. 30 years later, the food banks are still around. And the stop started as a food bank. It's in the west end of Toronto, near Lansdowne and Davenport. And it was located in an area called a food desert. So I think that's something you guys should follow up on if you're ever looking for a topic to explore when you're in. I'm sure, Stuart, you're going to probably touch on this, or maybe you already have. The concept of food desert. Anyone have any idea what a food desert is? Or even what that image of a desert brings to mind when it comes to food? Pardon? Exactly, it's an analogy. A desert has no water, no anything, right? It's just empty. And the idea is that a place that's a food desert would be empty. If you were to just look at it through the filter of, is there good food around here? So in the food desert that the stop is located in, there would be no grocery stores, there'd be no access to fresh food, there'd be no greengrocer, there'd be really no opportunities to garden, and the only food that you could get would be from a fast food outlet. And I'm sure you guys have explored what the problems are when people have to depend on fast food for their diets. So the stop set up shop in a low-income housing establishment. That's where they first were, and they still continue. Sorry, actually, I should know this better, but I think they might have started as a church and then moved to this housing site. So they set up as a food bank, and then somewhere along the line they said, we should start serving meals too. We got people coming here to pick up food, why don't we actually serve them a good meal too? So they added that. But then about 15 years ago, they started thinking more holistically around hunger and its root causes. And they started thinking, how can we help people gain skills and knowledge and really, get more connected to food? So they started adding what they call community cooking sessions, which is another word for often just a cooking class. Cooking classes where people come together and learn how to cook. They also do things where people share skills and learn how to cook together. So they have a group called Sabor Latina, and that's basically, it's a very, very diverse community that they live in, and so they invite women of Hispanic background and culture to come together and to share their techniques around food and to share their culture around food. And so while those wouldn't be a class, they would be considered a community cooking experience. So they started adding that, and they started adding gardening. The city of Toronto said to them, we've got this park right next to you, and there's this old bocce ball court, and I guess people don't play bocce ball anymore, and it was just sitting there empty. It was about 4,000 square feet, so maybe about 2 or 3 times the size of the one you got out here, maybe. And so they said, why don't you guys take that and turn it into a garden? And so they did. It's this great community garden in a park nearby. And then another park became available. They set up another community garden there. And then this really cool thing happened. So anyone know who that guy is? Jamie Oliver, that's right. He's the celebrity chef from Britain who's sort of turned his eye from being a gourmet and having cooking shows and selling cookbooks to addressing these bigger issues. And he's in a place called the Witchwood Barns. And so this is a really, really cool site. It was used originally, historically, for repairing streetcars. So the streetcars in Toronto that you're probably all familiar with, they roll them into this barn, and it was huge, and they fixed them and welded them and stuff like that. Anyway, they must have moved that somewhere else because it was just sitting empty for a long, long time. And then the stop, this is Nick Saul, he's the executive director of the stop, and he thinks big, and he said, let's turn this into a food center. Let's add now to what we've done at our fairly humble location, and let's really make this an amazing place. Let's start thinking bigger about this. And so they're actually standing in a greenhouse that they built in a wing of that Witchwood Barns, where they are able to grow food year round. And when Jamie Oliver came to the stop, he met with Nick, he got a tour, and he looked around and he said, this is the most amazing place I've ever seen. There should be one of these in every community across the world. And what's amazing is that that was already happening, that was already in Nick's mind. They were already doing research around what it would take to replicate the stop in communities around Canada and across the world. And the most amazing thing is that they picked Stratford to do it first. We're the first place where they're going to replicate the stop. And so we're a pilot project for the stop's replication. And I can announce this now. It's actually been kind of under wraps, but Nick Saul has officially announced that he's leaving the executive director of the stop. And he's becoming the executive director of a new organization that's going to be called Community Food Centers Canada. And so it's going to be a network like YMCA's or something like that, where they're all affiliated. They all have, you know, higher level support and people working to, you know, get funding and develop programming and share knowledge. So the local community food center here in Stratford, the Stop Community Food Center, and there's another one in Perth, Ontario, which is kind of near Ottawa. It's in a small town. We're the first 3 members of Community Food Centers Canada, and Nick Saul is now the executive director of Community Food Centers Canada. So it's an amazing opportunity that's come across here, and I am personally extremely honored to have something to do with it. So maybe I'll actually email you, Mr. Wilson, a copy of this report. It was called "In Every Community, a Place for Food," and it was published by the stop along with an organization called the Metcalf Foundation. And they asked themselves, what's the problem? What's the ideological problem that's setting up a situation where we live in a world where we produce enough food to feed everybody, but for some reason there's hunger all around us, even in Canada. And the problem that they came across was that food has been transformed from something that everyone has a right to, that everyone has access to something that is owned, bought, and sold. So it's a commodity, like oil, like gold or silver, or, you know, consumer goods. It's been sort of taken out of the hands of people and turned into a commodity to be bought and sold, just like those other products I was saying. And so the alternative view that we're working to sort of get entrenched is that food is a public good. It's a key to human health. So we have a public health care system, right? And why are we backing that up with a system that helps support people's food? You know, if we provide them with medicine when they get sick, why aren't we providing people with food to prevent that from happening? So it's a key to human health, and it is reflective of an equitable society. In a truly equitable society, everyone has access to good food. And that's something that we all have an interest in. Healthcare is a good example. We all pay taxes. You guys pay taxes. You pay GM or HST and stuff like that. So, you know, that's something that we all have an interest in, making sure that all those tax dollars are spent in ways that that have the biggest impact. And so when we're paying for healthcare expenditures for treating people with diabetes, preventable dietary related illnesses, then we're all losing it, because that's money that's going down the drain through hospitals that could be spent on things like schools. So the stop coming to town saw them partnering with the Food Security Coalition and saying, we love that idea of the food distribution center that you guys were working on. That's an amazing idea. We want to partner with you guys, and we want to add to it our great ideas. We want to add to it gardens. We want to add to it greenhouses. We want to add to it cooking classes. And we want to add some drop-in meals as well. And so that was the model that I was presented with. And so for the last year, I've been developing what we are calling the local community food center. So I'm actually currently an employee of the United Way. The United Way partnered with the stop on this. And so this is an initiative that the United Way of Perth Huron is spearheading in our community. Now I always say in a localized way here in Stratford, because obviously there's different needs in a community like Stratford compared to Toronto. There's also different strengths here. Anyone have an idea of what would be a big difference around the food systems in Stratford compared to Toronto?